And welcome back to WCTV for another episode of Jacket Sports Weekly. This week we're taking to the mats and the hardwood to recap wrestling and both men's and women's basketball.
Welcome to JSW, WCTV's home for Waynesburg sports. Watch our analysts discuss fall, winter, and spring sports and cover topics such as athletes of the week, phenomenal plays, and intense games on a weekly basis. Tune in every Tuesday to hear what's going on with your favorite sports at Waynesburg University here on Jacket Sports Weekly.
Where else would you want to be on?
Where else would you rather be? And welcome into this episode of Jacket Sports Weekly. I'm Michael McKenzie, joined by my co-host Seth Adams for this episode. We're going to get right into the breakdowns, analysis, recap, whatever you want to call it, of our winter sports, starting out with wrestling, and we're joined by at the end of the desk by Mo Kiger for the second straight episode. Mo, thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having me.
So we start off, we'll go back to the duels that were a couple of weeks ago. What was the biggest team factor in the three losses in those duels to Penn State Barron, Shippensburg, and Mount Union?
I mean, I really don't think that they really wrestle as a team, preferably, if you want to say that. I think that with a lot of injuries that they had to overcome during those three matches, that really affected them. But overall, I mean, you wrestle three really good teams, and I mean, losing to three really good teams, yeah, it could have been better, but there was also some takeaways that we could come out of that, and yeah, that's all I got.
And you mentioned the takeaways. What are some of those takeaways that we could take out from maybe some of the athletes that did have a better day than some of the others?
I mean, the takeaways, I mean, one of the heavyweights for them got their first collegiate win, and that was the heavyweight for them during that. And Jesse Oyburn was 3-0 on the day, and that was absolutely amazing, as he's still undefeated in wrestling. And the other takeaways, I mean, like all the other wrestlers, they just got to watch, because I know that we still have new wrestlers coming in, and they just need to build up, learn from the more experienced guys, and just build from them as you go into practices.
So now let's jump forward to this past weekend. Now it was the Penn College Invitational. Team finished 7th out of eight teams competing there, but there were some good finishes. 4 wrestlers placed. Who do you think had the best day at the Penn College Invitational?
I think Austin Fleming really had a really good day at the Penn State Invitational. He finished 2nd in his respected weight class of 285, and he went 3-1, and he won by 2 major decisions, and then he got a pin in the semifinals to make it to the finals, where he sadly ended up losing. But he had a great day with 2 major decisions and a pin, getting 2nd. That's outstanding. And then we take a look at Seth Evans, who finished 4th, and he's in probably one of the hardest weight classes in the collegiate level of 157. And he's a really well-rounded wrestler as it is, and to take that and only go out of the day of 2-2 with a loss in the semis and still ended up getting 4th, there's not much that you can ask away from him.
So we mentioned a little bit of the losses that we had, 40-10 against Barron, 36-3 against Shippensburg, 41-10 against Mount Union, and they finished 7th out of 8 teams in the Penn Invitational. So what can this team do better to turn the season around and play more as a team? You mentioned it a little bit before that it doesn't seem like as a team it hasn't been too well. What do you think they can do to play better as a team?
Really, I think that they just need to, like the younger guys especially, like all the freshmen and some of the sophomores, they really need to pay attention to the juniors and seniors, and maybe the 5th years, if there are any 5th years on the team, and just learn from them. Have more team bonding as a team, the way you just go out, watch a movie or something, get to know each other better, and then also as a respected teammate, you would want to help another teammate out. But other than that, yeah, they just need to work on those things, and I think they'll turn the season around.
You mentioned earlier Seth Evans at the 157-pound weight class. He had a very solid day, finished 4th at the Penn College Invitational. Aiden Bishop at 197. He had a good freshman campaign last year. He finished 6th in the 197-pound weight class. Understanding that the PAC championships in February are what this team and these individual wrestlers are working towards, how close do you think Seth and maybe Aiden Bischoff as well are to being maybe top 3, top 2, or even first place finishers in their weight classes among the PAC come February in the PAC championships?
They have a really good shot at doing that. I mean, we take from when they had their last invitational at W&J, they both finished at a respectable place. Seth placed 3rd, Aiden placed 3rd also. And for them to do that, Seth being a senior and going into his senior year, and that build up from freshman to senior year, that's going to help him out a lot. And Aiden Bischoff, he's a very strong wrestler from what I've seen. And he has a really good shot at beating everybody to get that first place finish at the PAC championship, which is also held at the Rudy Mercer Fieldhouse.
And we got the next one coming up, the Ohio Northern Invitational. That one is going to be coming up here soon. What do you think that Waynesburg can do as a whole to go into this match? Like, what can they prepare? What can they do to be ready to turn around and get things back on track?
Well, first off, they need all their wrestlers to come back from injuries. As we mentioned, they only had 5 or 6 wrestlers go to this last invitational. They need all their wrestlers to come in, and they need to just work as a team. And they are also looking for their first team win.
Well, thank you, Mo, for your insight on the wrestling team, hoping that they turn the season around coming up this next invitational. But don't go anywhere. We got Joseph Cirillo talk about some women's basketball right here on Jacket Sports Weekly.
You're listening to WCYJ FM, 99.5 The Hive, your home for everything Waynesburg. Our campus radio station gives students like you a chance to work in live studio environment without ever leaving Waynesburg. WCYJ FM has specialty shows, sports recaps, and updates, weather, and live coverage of your Yellow Jackets. Tune in at 99.5 The Hive or online at waynesburg.edu/listen.
Welcome back into Jacket Sports Weekly. We're heading over to the hoops side of things, and today joining us to talk about the women's side. First, we have Joseph Cirillo. Joseph, Joey, how are you doing today, my friend?
We're doing great. How are you doing?
Great. I'm doing great. I mean, Mike's
good.
probably doing great, but
I'm
we're not going to
always
ask him.
great.
Let's get right into it. We're coming off a couple of PAC games, finally getting to the PAC action. Have a loss against Grove City and a loss against Geneva, 86-80 against Geneva, 71-60 against Grove City. It seems like the women's team, they're right there, but just can't find that final step to get these couple of wins against the PAC opponents. What do they got to do to avoid having this happen?
I think just kind of looking more towards those starters that we're continuing to see here. Mia Hankins being the one leading the team in minutes and being tied for 3rd within the PAC for total minutes. But within that Grove City game, they had 12 total scores. So some can see that as a positive, some can see that as a negative, because then you're not having as many players kind of develop, get warmed up, and get that heat continue to go. You're just having a lot of people coming in and out. But for the Geneva game, you had Callista Friday continuing to do great that we've seen all season, having 22 total points against Geneva. Hankins having 31 total minutes. Dayton coming in for only 14 minutes, having 12 total points. So sometimes having those people kind of interchange, come in and out is a good thing, but that may be affecting them in the bad ways going into this conference play.
And we mentioned the scoring production off the bench, the depth on this team, but specifically Callista Friday, leading scorer on this team. 22 points against Geneva in 28 minutes off the bench. She hasn't started a game yet this year, but again, leading scorer, multiple games where she's led the team. She had the 30-plus point game against Carlo in the overtime win. Do you think she should be inserted into the starting lineup at some point here in the near future?
I don't believe so. Friday's continuing to do this off the bench for a reason. Being those starters that we do have has been that good way. It continues to keep their chemistry going in and off the court, but then it's also seeing that kind of, quote, second team that I like to call it. There's that first team that's starting, and then about 5 minutes in, we see a majority of those players come off the court. Mainly Hankins is the one to stay on, and we'll see the next come on, with Friday being one of those. But Friday having a new career high set this season against Carlo with 32 total points. It just continues to show. She's currently having 102 points on the season after that Geneva game, which is second behind Emily Garvin, who they played against Geneva with, who's sitting at 130. So she continues to do well. It's one of those things that some people are saying, let's put her in the starting lineup. Why not? But then in this point, they're doing well. It's clearly working that she's not in the starting lineup. So why would you change that? That's kind of my question to it. She's been doing great. You can't argue that. She's 55% from the field. So keep it going. Keep her on that bench and keep her coming in. And I think it's just going to continue to do wonders for this team.
No, I want to talk about the Geneva game a little bit, right? It was an 86-80 loss, but going into the fourth quarter, they were up 65-60, and then they let up 26 points and only scored 15 of their own. Now, last year we really talked about it was the dreaded third quarter. Last year, the third quarter was the death of them. They always had that one quarter that would kind of kill them in the end. So what does Waynesburg need to do to avoid having this one quarter and stay focused the whole entire game instead of giving up this one that gets them into a hole later or just right after half?
Well, like you said, last year it used to be that third quarter. And that's kind of how it started off in the beginning of the season. In those first two games that we saw specifically against Hood, that third quarter was not ideal, and you don't want to see that. Which now it's kind of started to shift into that first quarter in these first few games against Conference, and then also leading out with Carlo and Worcester as well. But the biggest thing is that with that first quarter, I'd rather have, because every team's going to have a bad quarter. Every team's going to have a bad few minutes. With this team, it seems like that's become a trend. So if I want that trend to stick in a way that's going to, help the team out, I would want that to be in the first half, adjust in the second half, and be able to get those game winners down in that half. So like you said in the Geneva game with that fourth quarter kind of slip up, I've been seeing it more in the first quarter area, but also it's been coming into that fourth. The third has been actually one of their best statistically for the season right now. So they're moving towards out of that trend of the third quarter like we saw last season, but now we're moving into that area of the fourth quarter, as you said. And I think just continuing to pressure and continuing to put your trust in those players that have been developing well throughout that game, I think is going to help them in the end.
Looking at the shot discrepancy for this team, specifically in regular field goals and three-pointers, this team has taken 25 threes in every single game, with multiple games over 30, even over 35 three-point attempts. They do have some good three-point shooters in Kara McFadden, Mia Hankins, and even Callista Friday, and Clara Page Miller can give you the occasional three. But can this team continue to, so to speak, live and die by the three, or do you think maybe they need to be more selective with when they shoot the long ball?
I don't think it's become really their culture to live and die by that three, but with that, it is kind of hard when you have those three-point shooters, but then you also have a lot of those rebounders down below. So the biggest thing is that Jules Moorbacher having a total of 54 rebounds, third in the PAC, is being helpful with that as they're allowing them to, go up, shoot those threes. Moorbacher is able to come in, get the rebound, bounce it back out, which has been helping. But we're seeing a lot more of those players that are going to be coming in, and it's only going to be like one rebounder, not two. But I think with the addition of Kayla Howard, who was able to come back in this Geneva game as well, her first game on the season, I think that's really going to help this team be able to get down, get those points from the paint, but then also get those rebounds, dish it back out. So I think now having that addition of Howard, kind of seeing where the rest of this conference play is going to go, especially into this Bethany game, maybe continue to try out what the threes are going to look like and see where that's going to continue for this team.
And Joe, I just want to mention that this team seems like it's a very different team than the last couple of years. Even last year, they're competing with the PAC schools that last year they got kind of blown out by. So I'd say this is a very different team from last year. Would you agree with that? That even though they started out with one of their best starts, they're 4-2 right now, but they're 0-2 in the conference. Tough couple of games that they lost. But do you think that this team as a whole has really turned things around and has a bright future, especially in the conference games coming up?
I definitely think so, because when Coach Jones kind of came out of that winning culture that he had in those consecutive winning seasons, he had a few of those different players that just kind of weren't clicking together, weren't really providing games well as he wanted them. And then when he kind of moved into this new generation, you might say, with McFadden and Hankins and Miller and all these different people that have came in. This is a young team, and they're continuing to develop very, very well, especially for a lot of these players that we saw being freshmen last year, now coming in as a sophomore, continuing to do well. A lot of the juniors moving on from their sophomore season, continuing to impress. Miller getting more time and being able to, kind of shoot just wherever, and it's been going in. It's really helping this team, and I think that it's going to help them in these next few games. Especially, you're having a lot of these leaders that are coming from the sophomore class. Hankins leading in minutes, as I said earlier, and had a full game against Carlos. She's the one that's majority of the time on that court. And although sometimes she might not have the points or the stats to back it up in that game, she's able to deal the ball out. So I think having those leaders as well is going to be helping this team, especially as they continue to progress through this, only having 2 total seniors on the roster. I think it's really going to help them throughout the rest of the season.
Well, Joey, thank you for taking the time to join us on Jacket Sports Weekly to talk women's hoops. They're playing tonight against Bethany, looking for their first PAC win of the season. 5 o'clock tip-off. Coverage begins on the Wayne University Sports Network about 15 minutes prior to tip. So if you can't make it out, tune in there. When we come back on Jacket Sports Weekly, we're wrapping things up, talking men's hoops.
This is so spice.
Cornucopia.
Trying instead of train.
I love this show.
And welcome into our last segment here on Jacket Sports Weekly. We're sticking with the hardwood and the hoops, and we're talking men's hoops now. Joined at the end of the table by Benicio DeFalco. How you doing today, Benicio?
Good. It feels good to be back.
So, first conference win of the season, and you get it against the defending PAC champs against Geneva. And it's their first win overall this season. They didn't pick up a win in non-conference play just yet. How big is this win for it to be the first one of the season against the defending champs?
I mean, it's a huge confidence booster. For starters, you mentioned this team was winless going into this game 0-4, just not the start you expected for this Yellow Jackets team. They're expected to be 4th in the President's Athletic Conference, the preseason polls. So just not the start you'd expect from the Yellow Jackets, and then they go on and they beat Geneva, the defending champs of last season. It's just kind of a confidence boost overall, and not much needed time. We're still early in the season, but this was a team that they started to deal with a lot of backlash, especially from, just it seemed like everybody was starting to get on this team with just the way they've been performing to this point in the season. And this was a big confidence boost and something I think we could look forward to them continuing.
And we talked about the Geneva game. They were down 31-22 at half, right? And then they ended up winning that game 65-62. So having a pretty bounce-back second half. What were the key factors, do you think, if it was players, gameplay, to having a better second half and getting the win over the PAC champs?
Well, you mentioned the second half, but I'm going to say it was about midway through that second half. It was 52-45 at one point, and that's where we saw Casey Cuzzy start to turn things up a little bit. He knocked down 2 threes. Waynesburg went on a 10-point run. They were able to stop Geneva, and then we saw Anton Baker. He has the season high so far with 17 points versus Geneva, and we saw those 2 players take over. And honestly, you got to give it to Casey. He knocked down 4 threes in that second half, and he was just a huge contributor overall.
Now, you mentioned Anton Baker, his best game so far, first time he's led the team in scoring this season, and that was really the big key we were looking for, a big Anton Baker game. But you mentioned it, Casey Cuzzy, 14 points in 19 minutes off the bench. Big game from him and a major contributing factor to Waynesburg winning this game. Do we continue to see his minutes go up as we've seen the production go up for the majority of this season, and now, at this point at least, culminating in that 14-point big-time performance against Geneva? Do we continue to see those minutes go up?
I think we should, because, yes, I know Fusina is a defensive-minded coach, but if you look at it, Jordan McLeod last season, yes, he was there on the defensive end, but he also brought a different aspect to this team offensively. And if you look at the game so far, yes, there's been Anton Baker, there's been PJ Suggs, but they're lacking that third man. And if he can step up, I could maybe see him be the sixth man to maybe even the starter, see Corey Mitchum come off the bench, like kind of a similar role to last season. And I'm sure he wouldn't be too offended by that just with the way he plays. He's a team player, and he's a scrappy player, a guy that you're going to need off the bench, and he works well with that second group, and we saw what he did last season.
Now let's head into the next game coming today. They play Bethany, right? This team is 5-0, undefeated. They have scored 90 or more in at least every game they played. Still have not played a conference game yet, but this is a very dominant team offensively so far. Waynesburg ranked 4th in the PAC in defense. So how do you think they're going to manage a team like Bethany next week?
I hate to be basic here, but it's going to come down to the defense. Anton Baker, the reigning Defensive Player of the Year, he's going to be matched up versus Daly. He's averaging 17 points at this point, pretty much 17 points across his whole collegiate career. So that's going to be the key matchup for the Yellow Jackets. Bethany, they're averaging 100 points so far, but they haven't played a President's Athletic Conference opponent. I think that's a key contributor there, just with the way the conference kind of works. It's more of a defensive-minded conference, and I wouldn't be surprised if everyone's averages start to go a little bit lower than what they are now. There's going to be no way, now that they're in President's Athletic Conference play, that they're going to be able to keep up that 100 points per game that they currently have. And they have 3 scorers averaging over 15 points, and if you look at it versus Grove City, that's what Waynesburg struggled against. They struggle against having multiple scorers willing to shoot the ball and their ability to score. And they're going to have to try to lock in on one guy, match him up versus Anton Baker. And like I said, I think it's going to be Baker versus Daly. It's going to be the matchup to look forward.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned Cole Daly, almost a matchup nightmare. Going to be one of the taller players on the floor, but he can knock down the three, knock down a mid-range jumper, play well off the dribble. How do you defend Cole Daly? Do you just run man-to-man defense across the board and tell Baker, you won the PAC Defensive Player of the Year last year, go make your money's worth now and justify that to the rest of the conference? Or do you almost go box and one and just face guard Daly around the rest of the floor and run that almost 2-2 zone against the rest of Bethany's offense and say, Cole Daly, you're not beating us, we're going to make the other 4 or 5 or 6 guys, however many guys Bethany's going to rotate in with Cole Daly, or are you going to have to make them or tell Bethany, those guys are going to beat us today?
See, I agree with you. I think they're going to try to key in on Daly. And how they do it, I'm not really too sure, because he's a guy that you're not going to want him to get to his spot. So if that's with running zone or matching Anton Baker against him, we're going to have to see. But like you said, he's just a guy, you can't let him get to his spots and start to get hot. He's one of the best players in the President's Athletic Conference so far in his career. And I like you said, I think they know Daly's going to get his, so they're just going to try to stop the other two as well.
They've played a couple of conference games so far, right? They played 2. They played Grove City, Geneva, and they're 1-4 on the year. But do you think that this game right here is going to be Waynesburg's truest challenge of the season so far, is going against this tough Bethany team with a heavy offensive side? Do you think this would be their toughest one?
I think it's going to be their toughest matchup to this point, other than Geneva, because they're the reigning champs. I know they're not the same team as last season, but Bethany, Waynesburg knows they can beat them. They've swept them last season in the regular season. So I think Waynesburg is going to have some confidence going into this game, some much needed confidence. And I think that this is a huge game for Waynesburg, but I will say this. Yes, I know their record doesn't show how good this team is, but if you look at it from a numbers perspective, I know Anton Baker, he's been a guy that a lot of people have been looking on. I know the first 2 games he was only averaging 6 points per game, but if you look at it last season, President's Athletic Conference play is where this Waynesburg team strived, and I'm almost confident that Anton Baker's numbers will go up as the season goes on, especially in President's Athletic Conference play.
And you mentioned conference play. Despite the 0-3 start in non-conference play, they're 1-4 overall in the season. That doesn't look pretty, but 1-1 in PAC play, that's quite literally an average start. You can get to the playoffs from that. Is this a must-win game against Bethany, or do you think they can afford to lose this? Obviously, you don't want to lose, but can they afford to lose this one? And then when we start the heart of conference play, coming back from winter break in January, are they still in a good spot, even if they're 1-2 in the PAC going into that big time stretch?
So I wouldn't consider it a must win, just with how early we are into the season. But confidence wise, you're sitting there. You're 1-4 on the season. You're 1-1 in the pack. You win this game, you're 2-1 in the pack. You're kind of almost at the top of the conference. So I think that it is not a must win, just where we're at this season so far. But this is a huge game for the Yellow Jackets, and I think they know that overall.
Well, thank you, Benny, for sitting down with us and talking about some of the men's hoops. Hopefully they have a great game today. But that's going to do it for us. So thank you to everyone who was on the desk and behind the scenes, and our producers, Mia Hankins and Tyler Aaron. Have a great Thanksgiving, and we will see you next week.
This has been a production of Waynesburg Community Television.